Welcome everyone to Beyond Metrics, a human-centered approach to MTSS for student success. So first, thank you all for saying yes. Yes, for allowing yourself permission to be here right now, especially during this time of the school year. So I know your time is valuable, and I'm grateful you chose to spend this time with us. So whether you are a classroom teacher, a counselor, an administrator, or somewhere in between, this webinar is for you. So before we begin, let's get a quick pulse check, right? So my quick question to you is, how are you feeling and functioning right now? So this can be either professionally or personally. I invite you to take a look, or I invite you to reflect for about 60 to 90 seconds. Take a look at the GIFs on the screen. Then if you wouldn't mind, type your name, your location, and the number of the visual that you feel captures how you may be feeling and functioning right now. So I'll model the way. My name is Marion. I'm in Prince George's County, Maryland. And right now, I would say that I'm a number 9. So I think we got this and we are ready to go in to 2026. So 60 to 90 seconds. Take a look at the GIF on the screen, type your name, location, and the number of the visual that you feel captures how you may be feeling and functioning right now. All right, as you continue to do that, just a little bit about Thrively and a few logistics to ensure a smooth session that we have today. I see some of us cascading in there. Thank you for that. So first, I want you to imagine being in a space. So whether that's a classroom, a school district where every learner is known by their name, their needs, their strengths, and their aspirations. Their well-being is supported in real time, and hope is instilled, and every student has at least one trusted adult with whom they have a solid connection. So this is the work of Thrively. At Thrively, we begin with one powerful question, and that is, what's strong with you? Our mission is to bring a paradigm shift in education, creating those conditions for learning, moving away from this deficit lens of what's wrong with you to an asset-based approach of what's strong with you. So it's that one shift is how we focus on humanizing learning. And we do this by partnering with educators like you in schools and school districts across the country to create strengths-based, joyful, and hopeful learning environments that increase student academic outcomes. So it's this idea, right? What's strong with you? And it's more than just a catchphrase. It's the foundation of everything we do. So on the screen in the lower left-hand corner, you can see one of my favorite visuals, and that's the What's Strong With You poster. It's simple, but powerful. So when schools display this near classroom doors and hallways or shared spaces, we've seen it become a daily invitation for students to really reframe how they see themselves. We've been able to see how this visual sparks hallway conversations, peer affirmations, and genuine moments of belonging. So if you like the What's Strong With You visual, a link is going to be placed in the chat to access the digital image for your own use. Also at Thrively, just want to share a little bit more about us. We created the industry's first assessment for children and adolescents that's unlocking the positive learning identities and strengths of every learner. We examine hope not as an emotion, but as a cognitive trait, and we measure it with our Hope Index, which helps develop goals, agency, and pathways. And lastly, we ensure emotional security with our well-being index that captures a holistic view of how students are feeling and functioning. So more information about our whole child assessments and foundational learning resources can be accessed by an additional link that's going to be placed in the chat as well. Now with the nuts and bolts out of the way, let me formally introduce myself. I am, again, Dr. Marion Smith Jr., Chief Learning Officer here at Thrively. And over the past 24 years, I've served in a variety of K-12 education capacities across 6 states. Right before joining Thrively, however, I served as the Assistant State Superintendent for the Maryland State Department of Education. And additionally, as a career-long educator, I've served from school principal, school teacher, to superintendent. And so I've been in many of the seats that all of you are in, and I bring an understanding of the challenges and the possibilities that await us when we move this work forward. I was born in Las Vegas, so I jokingly say there's a few of us that were born in Sin City. And I began my teaching and administrative career in my hometown of Las Vegas, the Clark County School District, which is the fifth largest school district in the country. I'm the co-author of the Racial Equity Adaptive Leadership Framework and the self-proclaimed UNO champion of the universe. I failed to mention I have a colleague here from Thrively as well, Jasmine Cox, who's supporting us behind the scenes. She thinks that she's the UNO champion of the universe. I still hold that title, Jasmine. But more importantly, everyone, for this conversation and throughout my career, I've noticed that we're often trying to address human issues and concerns without centering the person in the work as we look at different quantifiable data, right? And so today is really going to be about moving beyond the spreadsheets to see the human being at the center of all of those numbers. So I'm going to calibrate our expectations today. We're going to have 4 specific learning outcomes, and it's going to be quick. There's going to be a wealth of information, a wealth of resources, contact information to follow up with us, as well as you'll receive an email with all of the information that we talk about today. So I invite you just to sit back, engage, and listen, and then we'll have an opportunity to talk about the action steps moving forward. But our learning objectives for our time together, first, we're going to explore how to identify student strengths to really drive Tier 1 engagement and instruction that's personalized. Next, we'll look at how to use well-being and hope data in the moment and over time to monitor and inform tiered decision-making. Afterwards, I'll share a resource that's designed to help you map student-teacher relationships to ensure all students are visible. And all of this is going to be done to support your current work to really enhance what you're already doing so you can maximize your positive impact. It's not adding one more thing to your plate. It's all about how do I do or extend what I'm already doing in different ways to think about this holistic approach to our tiered supports. And so take a look at this visual here. So for many of us in the field of education over time, the language of tiered supports has taken many forms. So you may remember it as RTI, right? Response to intervention, or PBIS, positive behavior intervention and supports. We have MTSS, our multi-tiered system of supports. And now there's some conversations in some educational circles, it's called ITSS, integrated tiered systems of support, which is a more specific system that combines the academic, the social, the emotional, and the behavioral supports found within a traditional MTSS framework. So I like to say, whatever we want to call it, we understand that our students have different learning needs and we need to address those. So on the screen, on the left-hand side, we see the traditional MTSS triangle. However, during COVID, we experienced what we see on the right-hand side, right? That inverse of the MTS triangle. And some would argue that post-COVID, where we are now, we're still living in this inverse MTSS environment where at least 80% of our students need targeted, personalized support and resources. So with a continued shift in MTSS approaches, I think there's one essential question that we think about, and that is how do we leverage and operationalize our resources across the different tiers so that we can actually support students, center them in the work. What we know is that the evidence is loud and clear. So the Gallup student poll found that students are 30 times more engaged when their school is committed to building on their strengths. So not 30%, everyone, but 30 times more. So that's not a minor improvement, that's transformational. We also know that an asset-based approach is a key driver of equity in our classrooms. We've learned over time that when we lead with deficits, we unintentionally perpetuate those inequities, right? Constantly highlighting what certain students or certain groups lack based on our standardized benchmarks. But when we shift to recognizing and building upon our students' diverse strengths, their cultural knowledge, and their lived experiences, we actually begin to create those classrooms where everyone has the chance to succeed. So research also highlights that engagement and hope are powerful predictors of student success across multiple measures. And extensive studies on what we sometimes call those soft skills, right, are really core skills, which actually are the strongest indicators of long-term success. So in fact, these non-essential skills are actual better predictors of adult outcomes than our GPAs or our test scores. So we've actually seen the research, we've identified all of those game changers, but the question then becomes, so how do we make this a reality? How do we move this from theory to classroom practice to actually sustaining positive student impact? And at Thrively, we translated that research into action. It's called the Core Four, and it's those core four enabling conditions that must be in place, that must be supported, that must be internalized for us to really move this work forward. Here's a quick snapshot of these four conditions. So first, we build positive self-identity in every learner by helping them recognize their unique strengths through the industry-first strengths assessment. So this is the foundation of knowledge and how we serve as a catalyst for everything else that we do. Second, we support psychological well-being, focusing on how students are feeling and functioning. We instill hope, not as an emotion, but as a measurable, teachable cognitive trait. And lastly, we build authentic connections because deep, meaningful relationships are the foundation for trust, learning, and growth. And what we've learned after following the research is that these aren't just nice ideas, they're actionable, they're measurable, and they're rooted in science. So one of the things that we learn about MTSS is that traditional MTSS often focuses on those lagging indicators, right? So failing grades, absences, or behavioral referrals. But if we only look at what's broken, we actually miss really focusing on the student that's in front of us, right? We need to see the whole child to really maximize our system of supports. Typically, we usually ask, why can't they read at grade level versus what are they so passionate about that they'll fight through a difficult text to really understand it, right? Like that is human-centered MTSS, and that's going to be the focus for the remainder of our time. And that really begins with a mind shift change. You see the quote there from Diana Turk. In order for us to reach students, we have to know what they know, not just what they don't know. We need to see them and have them see themselves as capable learners who can learn and do anything. So how do we use our students' interests, their aspirations, their strengths to really fuel our learning and teaching practices as we think differently about how we provide supports for students? So when I think about this shift in this work of this human-centered approach to multi-tiered system of supports, I'm reminded of a video interview. It's less than 10 minutes, and it's about the concept of schooling versus education. It's by Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. He's the associate professor of La Raza Studies at San Francisco State University, and he's a veteran K through 12 teacher over 20 plus years in Oakland. And I'm going to place a link in the chat so that you have access to that particular video for your reference. Please take a look at that because it allows for us to begin that shift that Diana Turk is talking about from that deficit mindset to the asset-based mindset around this concept of schooling versus education and having this human-centered approach to moving this work forward. And so as we think about MTSS, if effective tier one instruction is like the engine, let's think about student engagement as the gasoline, right? And we've learned over time that we cannot intervention ourselves into student success. We've learned that if a student doesn't feel that the curriculum or the lesson reflects who they are, we see that they disengage. And we've learned over time that we cannot, again, intervention ourselves into this level of success. So I want to start talking about some of these initial entry points to humanize your approach to MTSS. The first entry point to do this is to identify a student's spark. So what is their innate strengths? What are their innate strengths, their interests, and their aspirations? So this begins with the Thrively Strengths Assessment. So it takes about 30 to 45 minutes to complete, and it's designed to be developmentally appropriate across K through 12. So when students actually complete the assessment, they receive personalized strengths profiles that highlight their top 5 unique strengths, interests, and aspirations, described in affirming, uplifting language. So what we see is that the assessment does more than just give a personalized report. It helps students surface the language to begin to name who they are and how they think as learners, right? It shifts that inner narrative from what I'm bad at to what I naturally bring to the table. And so some impactful ways that educators are using this resource at the different MTSS tiers is at tier one, they're identifying just common strengths across the entire class. Like an example, the majority of my class has high creativity, and they're using this to differentiate their instruction and to implement strengths-based seating or project groups. At tier two, they're using this to form strengths-based grouping, where they might be pairing a student with the top strength of, let's say, analytical with a student high in creative skills so they can support and promote cross-strength collaboration. And at that tier three level, we're seeing them utilize the strengths profile to build, whether that's individual or individualized behavior plans or IEP goals that really leverage what the student does well rather than focusing solely on the deficits. And in this tier three space, educators have shared with us that they've created a type of strengths-based success plan. So instead of just listing deficits, they're leading with, oh, because Marion has a strength of social justice, here's what we're going to be able to do to dot, 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 right? And an example of how that's played out in spaces is in those manifestation determination meetings or in disciplinary meetings, they're using the students' top 5 strengths to really brainstorm what are some of those restorative justice options when the student returns back to the learning community. As I said at the onset of this, 45 minutes goes by rather quickly, and I'm going to go over a variety of ideas, resources, ways to think about the work. As a follow-up to this, you'll have access to our MTSS holistic checklist that has all of these ideas for you to think through to see what works in your particular context to build upon your current work, and all of the other resources that I'll mention today as well. But I wanted this to serve as 45 minutes of just information that you can file away to say, wow, like I remember this, and this is something that I want to incorporate in my existing practices as I think about humanizing the work as it relates to our tiered supports. We know that a test score, a behavior infraction, are like Polaroid pictures. So I think I'm dating myself there for those of us that are know what those Polaroid pictures are, right? So we know they fade and only show one moment in time. It's just a snapshot. So we need a living profile. So beyond the initial Thrively Strengths assessment, we also offer 3 other whole child assessments that provide educators with additional learner-centered data for each student that may be used to help continue to inform your tiered supports. Another assessment is our MIDAS assessment that focuses on the multiple intelligences based on Howard Gardner's work. So really focusing on what are the learning styles of each of our students. Another is whole child assessment is the RIASEC, also known as the interest profiler, and that focuses on career and vocational pathways. And lastly is the whole child assessment called our habits of mind. And that's based on those 16 core habits identified by Kalick and Costa of successful people, those 16 habits of successful people. So in the chat will be a link to a one-pager with more information about each of these whole child assessments and the resources and the actual research behind them if you're interested in learning a little bit more there. The second entry point to a more human-centered approach to MTSS is how are we making visible how our students are feeling and functioning? And so our well-being index is a quick 60 to 90-second check-in. There are 6 prompts at the elementary level, 12 prompts at the secondary level that allows educators to hear directly, to hear quickly, and to hear systemically from each student. And so as a former middle school and high school teacher, I know that before I actually taught academic content, it was critically important for me to really set the stage for learning. And when you know better, you do better, right? And so that included setting the mental and emotional space for students to be able to receive academic instruction. And with the Wellbeing Index, educators get check-in frequency data on not only how students are feeling and functioning, but it's holistic, it's disaggregated, and it presents their information, how they're responding to certain prompts captured in real time. So think about it. Understanding how students are feeling and functioning enhances our ability to really adjust our teaching strategies in the moment. So when we see a dip or a change in a student's real-time well-being metrics before their grade drops, we can actually intervene proactively. So we're no longer chasing the fire, we're actually preventing it. So once students actually complete their well-being check-in, you're not just left with like this gut feeling of, oh, I think Marion's not feeling well today. Over the last 2 or 3 days, I've seen him be distant or not really talking to others, or his behavior may have shifted from what is normally expected. You actually receive real-time visual data that gives you a clearer picture of how students are doing. So on this screen, you can see the types of reports and data available to educators. In the upper left hand of the screen is a summary of how students are feeling and functioning. And that's going to be updated every time a student completes the check-in. So educators can they can actually disaggregate this data by time, by class, or even student groups so that they can spot patterns, changes, or those areas of concern. At the bottom of the screen, you see how the data is broken down into simple categories: feeling, functioning, and overall well-being. So this makes it really easy and clear for educators to interpret the actual results quickly. And on the right-hand side is an actual example at the individual student level. So Alejandro shared that he's lost his grandmother, and you can see how that impacted his feelings and his functioning score, right? So having this context allows educators to really respond with empathy and support while also recognizing that external factors can impact the learning. So this is where well-being becomes more than a one-time question. It actually becomes an embedded part of your practice. So instead of relying on those assumptions, you're getting actionable insights that helps you answer who might need quiet check-in today, or who's ready to learn, or how might I shift the tone of this lesson based on what I'm seeing. And beyond the individual student data, there's actual visuals that help you monitor the overall well-being of your classroom or your school culture over time. And that is especially powerful at the leadership level. So what could it change for you and your team to have this kind of data available on a daily or a weekly basis? So once we have this clear picture, from overall trends to individual student scores, the real question then becomes, what do we actually do with this data? And that's where we can turn insights into action and make a meaningful impact in the classroom. In the chat, we're going to place a link to a document that walks you through the steps of how to reflect on and to use the student well-being data. Some impactful ways that educators are sharing with us how they're engaging in this well-being data to really focus on this humanistic approach to MTSS is at tier one, they're using the data to monitor the whole class, how they're feeling and functioning, meaning getting that class energy level maybe low on Mondays, and they're actually conducting weekly well-being check-ins. And they're utilizing this data to, as one teacher shared with me the other day, to use this data to create like brain breaks or just community building circles when the data shows that there's a dip in emotional readiness. They're also using the aggregate class data to choose social emotional learning topics for morning meetings. At the tier two level, what we're seeing is educators are using the data to identify students who consistently report moderate or low well-being over a specific amount of time. Typically, it's about a 2-week period. And educators are then conducting those CICO meetings. So CICO stands for check-in, check-out meetings. And then they utilize the why from the Thrively journal entries or the well-being check-in to start that conversation. And at the tier three level, what we're seeing from educators is they're using the data to look for like those crisis alerts or just those sudden sharp declines in check-in data. And one educator shared with me last month that they utilize that to have those immediate one-on-one referrals to a school counselor or a psychologist. And they're using this to look at the historical data to show patterns during a support team meeting. One educator shared with me that they shared the 30-day well-being graph that's provided in the dashboard with families during a student intervention team meeting, just to illustrate the impact of certain life events that they knew about and the resources that they're applying to support that. And so in the chat, we're also going to place a link to the Thrively Social Emotional Learning playlist that can actually be used to enhance your work in this particular area. Remember, a playlist is a collection of lessons, standards-based aligned lessons, ready to use, targeting specific data points to move the work forward in that space. So we wanted you to have access to that information to support this individualized well-being data on our students. A third entry point to think about to a human-centered approach to MTSS is how are we instilling hope? And at Thrively, when we say hope, we're not talking about hope as an emotion, but we're talking about hope as a cognitive trait. And this is anchored in Dr. Rick Schneider's groundbreaking work on hope theory in 2000. And he defines hope in measurable terms and as a cognitive process, right? It's characterized by three components. First component is goals. We like to call that the what power. The second component is agency. We call that the willpower. And that third component is pathways. We like to call that the way power. So the next slide that you're going to see is going to have a lot of information on it. So I don't want you to get frazzled by that. And it's not for you to read, but it's for me to illustrate a point about the power of hope in education. And so over the last 25 years, researchers have actually conducted neural analysis of just the prefrontal or the frontal cerebral cortex of the brain, and that's where hope actually resides. And that research, we've learned a few things about the power of hope, and for our context, the power of hope in education. What we've learned is that hope is measurable. We've learned that hope is malleable. We've learned that hope mediates all anxiety in the brain, and it actually transforms cognitive learning functions. Through the research, we've learned that hope is the primary predictor of academic, career, and life success. We've also learned through the research that hope develops resilience, and when we as people are resilient, we're able to overcome many challenges put before us. And most importantly, hope is actually contagious. So I want us to think about that when we talk about this concept of hope as a cognitive trait, not as a simple emotion. So with this understanding of this research over the last 25 years plus, Thrively developed the Hope Index. So it's a quick 2-minute survey administered quarterly or at the start of each semester that measures agency, again, the willpower, and pathways, which is the way power. We've been able to partner with Kathleen Beachford, who's a veteran Virginia educator, researcher, and the best-selling author of the book, The School of Hope, to be able to bring this research into practice into thousands of schools across the country. And if you want to dive deeper into this particular work, we've created a full set of Hope resources for students, for adults, and for leaders that you can access right now. A link is going to be placed in the chat to access this information. One of the things I want to reiterate is that instilling hope doesn't just change how students feel, it changes how they think, how they act, and how they persist. And that's what really drives long-term success. So you've heard a little bit about the research, and you've seen the power of hope in shaping just our cognitive outcomes, resilience, and motivation. But instead of me just talking about it, I want you to actually experience it firsthand. And so let's take the actual hope survey together just as your students would. So this will take about 2 minutes. You'll be answering questions and prompts that reflect how you see yourself pursuing goals and finding ways forward. Again, your agency and your pathways. And so you can go ahead and scan the QR code if you are in a place to do that. We'll place the actual link in the chat. There's a code 73010. You'll be prompted, for those of you that do not already have a Thrively account, to set up your free Thrively account to access the Hope Survey. If you already have a Thrively account, you should be able to click on the link that's in the chat or use your QR code and enter code 73010 to get access to the Hope Survey. If you've already taken the Hope Survey, hold on to that because we'll be reporting out our scores in just a minute just to see where we are right now with our Hope. Again, Hope Survey, 2 minutes, and you'll get your Hope scores immediately. One thing that I want to preface is there are no right or wrong answers to this. It's simply a snapshot of how you see your ability to set goals and find your way toward them right now. And we also wanted you to get an experience of what that looks like for students who may engage in taking the HOPE survey at least 2 times a year to address their goals, agencies, and pathways. And so as you complete the survey, think about how this could feel for other adults and students in your learning environment to have their inner drive and their potential and strengths being named, measured, and nurtured. And so this particular resource gives you the visibility into something that we rarely stop to talk about as it relates to goals, agency, and pathways. So I'm going to pause for about 60 seconds or so for those of us that may be engaged in looking at the HOPE survey, scanning the QR code, clicking on the link in the chat to access the information. We'll also include this in the follow-up email for those of us that would like to take it during a different time. And for those of us that are taking the survey, the HOPE Index, when you do get your final score, if you wouldn't mind placing that in the chat. So we just have a cascade of those, making our HOPE scores visible. Remember, there is no right, there is no wrong. This is just where we are right now as we think about our agency, pathways, and goals. And so I see a few of us listing our information there. Another 30 seconds or so for us. Remember, quick 2 minutes. That's going to unlock even more human-centered information to inform our MTSS framework. Thank you all for sharing your information there. And so as you continue to take the HOPE survey, I'll speak about the number that you actually, or the numbers you receive. So scores on the actual survey range from 2 to 36. So each question is rated on a scale, and the combined total gives us a snapshot of our current level of HOPE. So a score of 20 or higher is considered mid to high HOPE, and that's where we start to see the most significant cognitive and emotional impact. So according to the research, when students and adults reach this particular threshold, we've essentially rewired the brain, right? And we've begun to engage with learning, relationships, and even challenges with more persistence, more clarity, and even more confidence. And the best part, hope is malleable, remember from our research. So with the right strategies and the supports in place, it can actually grow in both students and adults. So whether your score was a 16 or a 30 today, remember, this is not fixed. This is just informative, and it can help guide how we support one another. And so what are some of the impactful ways educators are using this resource as they think about this human-centered approach to their MTSS tiers? So tier 1, we've learned that some educators are using the data to establish just a baseline to support student goal setting, their executive functioning, and their student agency. Educators are actually teaching the science of hope around goals, agency, and pathways, and they're using Thrively's lessons and playlists to help students set their first SMART goals, right? Those goals that are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely. At the tier 2 level, we've learned that teachers and educators are utilizing the data to focus on students with low pathway scores, right? Like they have goals, but they're not quite sure how to reach them. And what they've been able to do at this tier is provide what they're calling pathway mapping, right? They're creating these workshops or lessons in small groups to break down those large tasks into micro steps, into micro chunks, so they can have quick wins for larger goals. And at the tier 3 level, we've seen educators utilizing the data to identify students with low agency, and or what they've been able to do, like I thought about another educator that just came to mind, is they're engaging in just one-on-one hope coaching, right? So they're being able to identify students with low agency. They don't believe they can change their circumstances. And they're engaging in these one-on-one hope coaching sessions focused exclusively on agency reinforcement by celebrating those very small, high frequency successes. So an example is they're using the Thrively Journal feature to have students actually record one thing that they had control over each day to rebuild their sense of self-efficacy. And I like to say that hope is probably one of the strongest predictors now that I've learned more from the perspective of Dr. Rick Snyder's work of looking at hope not as this emotion, but as a cognitive trait. And we're seeing educators lean into this space to really focus on assisting students with their individual goal setting, executive functioning, and agency as they utilize just the initial data that they get from the Hope Index. And so that brings me to a final entry point to think about as you're focusing on this human-centered approach to MTSS, and that is all about student-teacher connections. So if everyone could just take 60 to 90 seconds to think about one student you wish you would have connected with sooner. And if you could just put the first name of that student in the chat. So we're not going to violate first and last names, but just think of one student you wish you would have connected with sooner. And then as you place that student's name in the chat, I always think about Tatum. Tatum was a kindergartner when I was an assistant principal in Seattle Public Schools. And so think about what were the signs of disconnection and what could have helped you as you think about that. And if you wouldn't mind taking another 60 to 90 seconds, thinking about that student, I'm thinking and holding Tatum in the front of my mind. What were the signs of disconnection for Tatum, and what could have helped me engage and connect with him more? If you wouldn't mind just placing just one thought or idea about this one student that you wish you would have connected with sooner. Thank you. I see some of our thoughts there. Thank you for sharing. As you continue to do that, we know through research and just practice, we've learned over time that school culture isn't built by programs. It isn't built by systems. It isn't built by school improvement plans, right? It's built by people who feel connected. And we've experienced that relationships are fundamental to learning. They're the heart of student engagement and growth. And so the Connections resource at Thrively helps educators visualize and actually strengthen the relationships that they have with students. So the resource ensures that no student is left out or left behind by making it visible where connections are strong and where they need more intentional care. So by mapping relationships and connections, educators get a better understanding and can better support every student's social and academic journey. So as a former superintendent, one of the items that was really top of mind for me was the student who flies under the radar, right? Like the quiet ones who aren't failing, but they aren't flourishing, right? Belonging, we know, is a prerequisite for an opportunity to thrive in your space. So if a student isn't seen, they won't be served. I'll say that again. If a student isn't seen, they won't be served. And so how do we use our data to intentionally bridge the gaps to build a culture where every name, every student has a story attached to it, and we understand every student by their name, their needs, their strengths, their aspirations, their well-being is supported in real time, and we've instilled hope. And so we use this relationship mapping to really identify which students lack a meaningful connection with at least one trusted adult in the building. So the Thrively Connections tool is this relationship intelligence system that does just that. It helps you identify connections, it helps you visualize the disconnection risks, and it allows for you to take targeted actions through curated resources. And what we've seen so far since launching this last school year is that at least one school district that we've been tracking moved over 30% of staff and students from that distant personal connection tier within 2 months. The impact of that particular school environment is that staff turnover dropped by 40% and absenteeism significantly decreased across both staff and students. Remember, if I feel connected, if I feel a sense of belonging, if I feel that you know who I am and you're creating lessons targeted to my strengths, my interests, my aspirations, if you have a pulse on how I am feeling and functioning, if you understand my goals and you're creating agency and pathways, all of the ways that I've shared how to humanize our MTSS approaches, we meet success. We meet the opportunities to lean in with our students. And so let's take a more in-depth look with a quick video overview of the connections tool. All right, I'll make sure that we see that and it's included in our follow-up email. It's a quick 1-minute video that provides a quick overview of the particular resource that I just shared with you, that connections tool. And it's all about making this part of your routine because it's going to help you empower you to be more proactive in creating those inclusive, supporting school communities because it focuses on authentic connections. And so, what are some of the impactful ways that educators are utilizing this resource and its data at different MTSS levels or tiers? So, tier one, we've seen that they're using the visual data and the mapping to see student interactions and connections. And so, one teacher shared, oh, well, I've noticed that over the last month and a half, I haven't spoken to these particular students or these 5 students. Oftentimes, I speak to the students who raise their hand the most or the ones that I feel that I have a deeper connection with for a variety of reasons. And so that tier one is just being able to see what connections I do and do not have in a visual manner. Tier two, educators are sharing with us that they're actually displaying the data during staff meetings to help identify key action steps for moving beyond that transactional connection level and incorporating other data like our strengths profile, the well-being index data to be able to say, here's some specific interventions and steps I need to take to move that work forward. And then lastly, tier three, we've seen and what has been shared with us since launching this last year is just school-wide work to identify students with the lowest connection levels. So back in the day, and I'm just going to date myself, you have the red, yellow, green, you have the students, and then we put our MTSS board together. We're tracking, here are the students for that we're monitoring, utilizing specific metrics that may fall in the red, the yellow, or the green. This allows for us to have visual markers specifically around the connections that we may have with our students. And then what they did in this particular school is that they actually assigned an adult mentor to specific students. So this is where humanizing the data really is important. This goes back to, I know that Marion has these top 5 strengths, and I know that someone on campus is a musician. Wow. And so, what a great way to form that authentic connection in a way to build, at least have that one trusted adult on campus that's forming this relationship there. We may not have gotten that if we didn't understand what were some of the interests or the aspirations or even strengths of our particular students without taking the time to get to know who they are. And so, that's one of the strengths of being able to utilize the connection tool. And so, what's the path forward? And so I'm not asking you to throw away your current MTSS framework or any of the approaches that you're currently doing. I'm simply inviting you to humanize them, right? So my ask of all of you is that when you sit in any meeting discussing a student, that Thrively student first data, whether that's student's strengths profile, well-being check-ins, hope index, that information should be on the table or displayed on the screen right next to the reading and math scores, right? It's about including this into the work you're already doing. And so as a follow-up to this webinar, each of you will receive also a copy of the Thrively Holistic MTSS checklist to support your continued work. And my invitation or challenge by choice to each of you is to select one of those to be able to see how can I possibly begin to incorporate this holistic, humanistic approach to looking at this data in the work that I'm already doing as I'm providing tiered supports. And so before we end our time together, I want to forecast just a few of our upcoming Q3 webinars. And so listed there starting or on February 12th, 17th, and then March 5th, 17th, and 31st are our quarter three webinars. The next webinar is going to be an extension of this webinar where we're going to hear from one of our customer success managers who's also a former school principal that's going to take the systems level MTSS approach to how are we now moving beyond the dashboard data? Because we know that the data lives in the dashboard and it has to go somewhere else. It actually has to be taken into action. So, how do we move some of these human centered strategies and resources that I shared into your classrooms on an everyday basis and have those key takeaways of how to do that in meaningful ways in your system? And so, be on the lookout for an email with details about each session and registration information because we want to keep the conversation going to continue to support the great work that you're already doing. And so, as I said at the onset, 45 minutes goes by rather quickly. I want to thank you all for just joining me today and engaging so thoughtfully just in the conversation. A wealth of information. You'll have resources sent to you. And my invitation is simply for you to think about your current tiered support structure and how can you begin to enhance and support your current work by adding some of these elements to your tier one, tier two, tier three practices. Take just one of them and figure out over quarter three, here's what this could look like, or quarter four. If you have any questions later, or if you want to continue the conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out. So Marion at thrively.com. I'm always happy to support your journey, to talk through resources, to provide additional information and insights, and also just to be a thought partner. And how do I do this in meaningful ways in the context that you're in? And until next time, I would like for us to continue creating those strengths-based, joyful, and hopeful learning environments that strengthen student educational outcomes. I want to thank you all for your time today, and I look forward to staying connected. Thank you all.